Welcome to Lisa from Bermuda, the Pride Bermuda Program Coordinator, and all of our other friends. If you'd like to let us know who you are, where you're from, what your position is with schools and community organizations, that'll help us out. But I'm very excited to welcome my dear friend, Dr. Ivy Bonk with Every Child Whole, as we talk today about George Who, the circle of distraction. And as you know, we have been living in unprecedented times with the murder of George Floyd, and we just want to honor him and his family today as the funeral is taking place. And I'm grateful for his sacrifice and how his life and passing have elevated the conversation of race and identity in our country and around the world. But for all of us, it has been a time of incredible trauma. So Ivy, will you please share with us about your work with Every Child Whole and how you help address trauma?
I will, and I'll do that. And if I can have just a couple minutes to share some of my backstory that brings the connect between, you had written somewhere about the intersect between race and trauma. So
Yes.
that's actually part of my personal journey. So as Tamara said, Dr. Ivy Bonk with Every Child Whole, and we are an international educational services organization providing consulting, advocacy, and training, but we do that through a lens of trauma. We always have this perspective coming from a trauma lens, and that actually happened because 12 years ago, I was a principal, and I was responsible for approving and reviewing and approving referrals for special needs testing. And so this particular day, this child was being referred. The question dropped in my spirit: am I looking at a true learning disability, or am I looking at symptoms of trauma? And so my quest for answers led me to 2 weeks later, I would be enrolled in the doctoral program where I would research the hypothesis of the correlation between LD and trauma. Well, it didn't take long to find out that indeed there is a correlation, but not only was there a correlation, but it happened at increased rates for children from disadvantaged communities. So, and having worked in the education system, knowing that it's broken, to me that became at that point became a matter of justice. And I think that sensitivity to injustice had been seared. I'd probably been prepared for this from childhood, because I'm actually a sexual abuse survivor, thriver, victim, whatever you want to call it. I was molested by my uncle when I was 6 years old. I was my father was a pastor, and so this kind of got swept under the rug, didn't get addressed, and so I'm responding to the trauma. And when I was 17, I ended up getting pregnant by African-American man. Well, if you know anything about the Deep South, and you can tell I'm got a few years on me, that at that time, there was not something that you did. We could pray with Jerusalem Baptist on World Day of Prayer, but that was as far as it went. So long story short, at 6 months, I was forced at gunpoint to have an abortion because of the fact that this child was Black or biracial, obviously. So that, so basically run out of town. So that injustice seared that sensitivity, in my spirit. So that day when I was witnessing this, as in this child, seeing this disconnect, I think that changed the trajectory of my work. That was 12 years ago. And I purposed then that this was what I'll be doing till I'm not here anymore. So that's my intersect of race and intersect. So like I said, so we've created training for administrators. The result of that doctoral research was trying to equip educators, but also now, if you think of, I was just talking to someone earlier, if you think about just a classroom, if you could imagine a classroom with traumatized students in it and multiply that out across millions of kids in our school system, you can see why we have a very broken and fragmented school system. So we try to, build up, equip the teachers, give them tools. That's why I love, what you're doing with SEL. That's trauma healing, right? If we can intervene early and get some of these things in early, have a partner that works with EQ interventions, doing these things early to bring about some trauma healing, you know, maybe we can change the trajectory of this thing.
Ivy, thank you so much for being so vulnerable and sharing your story with us, your personal story as well as your professional story, and how that highlights your work. I want to ask you, in light of the current events that we're experiencing with the murder of George Floyd, the racial protests that are happening worldwide, even the riots that have occurred, how is past trauma informing this current crisis that we're experiencing globally?
Well, it informs everything. It's the same idea of micro, macro. It's a cumulative effect. So, you know, when you get into, you know, situations with other people, if you've not healed, if you've not addressed some things, all you're going to be doing is triggering off the other person, right? We don't give people room for, you know, because we're not healed, we don't give people room for conversations, to make mistakes, you know what I mean? One of the things I mentioned in the article that is so frustrating for me is that in our school system, I mean, you know, working with schools and doing SEL work, we talk about growth mindset, we talk about creating empathy, we create all these things which say we're trying to instill in these children, and then in the real world, we're doing quite the opposite. We're not modeling what we say that they need to know. And so there's such a disconnect, and that disconnect comes from unaddressed trauma, you know, because what happens, and, you know, even as, you know, as my case, when I went back for my doctorate, I was in my 40s, you know, I'm not too much older than that yet, but when I went back, I was in my 40s, but it was like, I was responding. You know, I was doing self-protect, I was doing mitigating, I was doing coping, you know, all these things, still responding from way back when that happened when I was 6 years old to then. So these things pile up and the same things happen. So the people you're seeing in the street, you know what I mean? And some of these, you know, all these volatile things that are happening, are people just responding to, and just the weight of it. There's only so much you can, you know, obviously so much you can take, right? And so, you know, I agree with what you said about George's death, bringing this to the forefront or to the surface, however you want to say that, but also just to understand and know that some of the people are coming to this with a lifetime of unaddressed, you know, trauma, issues, whatever, however you want to state it.
So what I hear you saying too is that the trauma is compounded, because there's the trauma of the Black community that has gone on for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And then there's the individual trauma that the people who have been protesting are bringing with them, their own anger.
I mean, we just came off a pandemic, or, you know, maybe we're still in it, but whatever that is, exactly.
Right.
And then when you're going to school or working within systems that are re-traumatizing, like our school system is broken, you know. So
how would you say, when you mention that the school system is re-traumatizing, how would you qualify that? What kind of re-traumatization is occurring within the school system?
Well, just one example would be, so when you have your brain is interrupted from trauma, that impact can put more impact on the left hemisphere than it does the right. This is just one example, but than the right. And then, but in traditional education, what side of the brain do we teach to? The left. So we're putting more pressure and demanding something out of something that's already in a weakened state or fragile state, right? That in itself is re-traumatizing. I mean, and it's no fault of educators. We're doing the best we know how to do, right? But it's, again, I mean, the reason for that, I created the course in the first place. If teachers are coming, you know, or come to the classroom ill-equipped. Now, and I started doing this training, and then I could start getting pushback from educators, because they said, you're telling us what to do, but we're not even in a situation where we can do it. Some of these teachers have scripted curriculums, and they have to go by the script, which doesn't allow for, you know, recognizing the gifts of a student, or recognizing that maybe this behavior is not what it looks like, you know, and we're sending them down to ISS or whatever we call it, you know, instead of trying to understand what happened this morning or last night or whatever it is, you know. So those, I mean, there's a myriad of examples that you could use as how we, you know.
And I was thinking too, when you mentioned the re-traumatizing, that a lot of our discipline protocols are re-traumatizing our children.
Of course, you reminded me of another one, because I know several schools. I know of a school that had its teachers do mandatory restraint training. Okay, well, that's all we need to say about that, right? You can imagine. what that does to somebody.
And that makes me think about that school to prison pipeline that
Oh
we
yeah,
talked about, and
exactly.
especially discipline disparities, and just all of that re-traumatizes students, especially our students of color.
And there's so many. So there's a myriad of variables. We've already addressed several variables. There's different ways to come at it. And so imagine all these people showing up to this conversation that we're having right now in our country, coming from different experiences, and nobody's seeing things exactly the same way. I don't know two people that agree on anything. You know what I mean? So so anyway, you can see how the trauma impacts the conversation that we're having.
Yes, yes. So friends, again, please let us know who you are, where you're from. We will have a time at the end of our conversation for your questions, and you can add those to the chat too, because I'm sure there's lots of questions around this. But Ivy, I want to continue. How is the news impacting our well-being? So the news around the pandemic, the news around the protests that are happening, the news around police brutality, how is that impacting our well-being, given all the trauma that we've experienced individually and collectively?
Well, some people, I don't know who they are, they are, but they benefit from other people's chaos and hurt. I mentioned in the article, so I reach out to a friend, this African American young lady who works in the community where I'm from, or upstate, and I'm checking on her, seeing how she's doing. And she said, Dr. Ivy, she said, I'm up there trying to get our young people off the streets because those people weren't us. People breaking things, the looting, the lawlessness, this kind of thing. She said that's not who we are. That's not us, right? And so she said they were whites, Asians, out of state tags. She said, so unfortunately, then the media, that's what we're hearing reported. If you're home, if you're just this white Caucasian middle-aged sitting home and all you do is watch TV I'm just giving an example, and that is what you're seeing, right? Then you're equating Black Lives Matter to lawlessness, looting, all this kind of things. And that is not at all, the situation. That is not the people that are in pain and fed up with injustice, not that some people don't do, things, but as a whole, that is not, one thing is not equivalent to the other. But if you're sitting there in the media and this is what you're seeing and you're not engaging and informing yourself otherwise, then you feel justified in having your biases, or you know what I mean? So it's this vicious cycle. And then the real thing, the thing that needs to be addressed, the injustice, the inequities, they never get addressed. That was the point of the article was, we keep chasing this thing and we'll be here, well, God forbid, but in our past history has shown we'll be here again.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't change.
Dr. Ivy, you're mentioning the article, and just friends, so that you know, Dr. Ivy has written an article, and it is called George Who, The Circle of Distraction. So could you give us just a high level view, and would you be willing to make that article available to everyone through a link?
Sure.
Okay, great.
I mean, a lot of it covers what we've already talked about. It's just how, we get, because we're not emotionally regulated, because we don't have, we didn't get healing when we should have early on, and we're taking all these compounded traumas into our adulthood, then it's easy for us just to react emotionally. And not that even if you are somewhat emotionally healthy, that it just doesn't piss you off and, pain you at the deepest level. I'm not saying that, but those who are just, doing erratic things, that they're probably going to be and tearing each other down, this kind of thing, which is not going to lead to a good end or even resolve the problem. It just creates more fragmentation within themselves, and with the people around them. And so, yeah, so it's that whole thing. And just like the cycle I just said, so if we equate that kind of behavior to somebody's pain and injustice, then we just keep going in circles and nothing ever gets resolved. And that's the work I'm doing is hopefully to interrupt, that's my heart, is to interrupt the inequity in the education system. So, we're working on, creating changes there, so anyway.
So, and thank you for sharing more about that. So what can we do to promote the healing and wholeness that all of us need. So if we start, let's start with that, with the education system. What kind of disruption or interruption are you looking for that will help promote justice for all of our students?
So, well, for example, a lot of our programming in our schools are the services we provide are fragmented and incongruent. And so even if we talk about equity within a system like that, then it becomes inequitable. It's still inequitable, right? Because it's broken. Just think of a rusted pipe, and you put clean water in the rusted pipe, it's going to come out tainted, regardless of, how clean it was when it went in, right? So dealing with some of these fragmented services at a kind of an organizational, but at a school level, because it has to be an individual school, because individual schools have unique needs. It can't be cookie cutter, right? So, I mean, the whole child is another. So I have like 5 things that we focus on is integration, and that's like vision for the school, the core values, how you're delivering your services, and training. Is everybody on the same page? I could give you, I don't know how many examples of, so they take this SEL program, second step, whatever it's called, something like that. And the school psychologist telling me about it. And I said, well, so what is your part in that? And she said, oh, no, I don't have any part in that. That's the school counselor. So you see what I'm saying? So it's like, if we're not all on the same page around, and the child is not the centerpiece, then, it's going to creating these gaps and these breaches. So everybody trained on the same page, everybody trauma informed, everybody, SEL, whatever it is, but we're all on the same page, headed in the same direction. And let me just say, it starts with, you can't do any of this at a school level without a courageous leader, right? You have to have a leader that's has the courage to step up and do something different, because at this point, and especially in high needs schools where I'm called to, high minority, high poverty schools, that's my heart, is to interrupt that, because I believe everybody has the story to tell, everybody. And so, but, so it's going to take coming out from, underneath that incentivized failure, because these schools are incentivized to fail. You receive funding, right, for your programs. And so if you have a funding stream you're getting because your students aren't performing, then what do you want to do? You want to have students that are not performing, so you can continue to receive money. It sounds horrible, but it goes on, right? And
Right.
so integration of services in those areas that I talked about. Whole child, this whole thing. I mean, I rebranded at the end of last year or the year before, and this was around this whole idea of whole child, because I was in DC doing heard this SEL train coming down the track, and we haven't even addressed the trauma piece yet. You know what I mean? And so I said, how can you talk to me about whole child? We've been talking about whole child for 2+ decades. I know, right? So don't talk to me about whole child unless you're talking about every child whole. And then I was like, oh, that's it. So the whole child integration, whole child, the multi-generational. This is a systemic, cyclical thing, generational thing. We have got to find a way in public education to reach back, engage, equip, and help our parents.
Yes.
The services may not happen through the school, but we have to have relationships. We have to be facilitators, resources, clearinghouses, whatever we have to do, because otherwise you're just pouring water in a bucket with a hole in it. Because you can't pour all this into the kids. I mean, we do, but I'm just saying it's going to be less effective when you're sending them home and you're not even, we're not trying to help the parents. So there has to be a full-on, effort around the whole multi-generational piece. I tell folks, my motto would be, if I was, with a leader at a school, I would say, if your child goes to school here, so do you. Conversation, So, and that, because they're going to be the better for it anyway. So there's integration, whole child, multi-generational, systemically sequential. Now we know the brain works in a certain way, bottom to top, right? There's certain order for things, but we have so many things going on in our education system, all these different programs. We don't know what is a function of what came first, what came next, how they connect, which adds to all this chaos and fragmentation, right? So systemically sequential, which, applies to programs, which applies to initiatives and this kind of thing. but all these things that I'm talking about, because this is kind of a scaffolding thing, goes back to did you do the stuff on the front end? Are we all on the same page? Do we have core values? Are we, is the child the center, this kind of thing? And then lastly, when you are doing all these things and you're building up these schools, then the fifth piece, fifth key strategy we talk about is transdisciplinary. Are all the people at the table, are all the stakeholders at the table? If you're doing all this right, you're going to have people knocking down your door to get there and help you support these families, these children, and this community, right? And we're going to start to see, right? Because we're going to start to see kids succeeding, families start getting healthier, addressing these issues. And so that's some of the ways that we're addressing that.
This is so good, Ivy, and I'm hearing many things. Two things I want to ask about. And friends, if you want to go ahead and post some questions in the chat, if you have them for Dr. Ivy or for me, that would be great. Now's the time to do that. So what I hear you saying is that we must keep the child at the center. Absolutely. What can we do? What are some practical things that we can do to help those kids become whole?
Well, I mean, absolutely. Getting the, the SEL program, but it's not even, of course, we know you've been doing SEL forever, but yeah, but to me, if they don't understand the trauma, because I would tell people, if you don't know the origin, you can't determine the outcome. So we have to be able to help, when we help our educators, we're going to be able to help the children better. But when we create this crosswalk, right? From trauma to understanding the trauma to connecting it to how that connects to the social and emotional learning competencies that we're asking teachers now to deliver on, right? That, that they're going to be more congruent in their delivery and their ability to assist the child. I mean, obviously, in the training that we do, the day trauma came to class, at the end of the day, this is about the student's needs and what is the context for the student. You have to create context for the student. We would never go, we, as adults, we don't buy things. We don't have, engage in experiences that don't have any relevance or meaning to us, right? Right. They have context. And so, but we don't do that in education and then wonder why we send them off from school and they don't, have no clue what they're supposed to be doing. You need to create this context, this understanding of who they are, where they came from, what are their strengths, their passions, their interests. And so you can make context, create the contextual, environment in the instruction. That way they're going to, they'll be able to, especially doing hand in hand, doing that with the trauma, healing, they're going to be able to that's going to have somewhere to land. And then they're going to respond, you know what I mean? And when they find out, they find it when they're doing this on top of something they're good at, they're passionate about, ooh, they're going to love that feeling. They're going to want to do it again and again and again.
That's good. So we've got some questions. Teresa is asking for some resources for making educators more trauma informed. And I'm imagining, Dr. Ivy, that she can find those resources at Every Child Whole, correct?
Yep, she can. And Teresa, it's Ivy at or info at, either one of those works, at Every Child Whole. Just drop me an email.
And I will provide, friends, a follow-up email, and Dr. Ivy will provide resources to me. I'll send those out to you after the webinar. It'll probably be either later tonight or tomorrow that you get those, and you'll have links for the resources we talk about. Mara Lee from Delaware is asking, what is the best way to support and yet retain the dignity of the child and the family?
Support and maintain the dignity of the child. Well, but we don't, obviously, if your thing said you're from a preschool, so that's a very, that's the best time to do something. In that case, for me, Mary Lee, my thing would be as much as you can support the parent, right? And so this is questioning, having the art of questioning. You never want to make somebody feel judged or in a bad place, like they've done something wrong. Obviously, I know just this whole, we actually have a parent course that we're building out called the Ins and Outs of Secure Parenting. So bring that kind of, because after we buried and pushed this stuff down for so long, then, and it's not just people of poverty or of any particular race, trust me on that one, right? But if we pushed it down for so long, then it takes this whole almost having a conversation to kind of bring this to the surface, and so they can recognize why I keep doing this. It's first, they don't want to keep doing whatever this thing is that they keep doing. So if we can help connect the dot or turn the light switch on, sometimes the power of self-awareness can flip something. So, I mean, I would just, build relationship. I mean, I was so frustrated going to, when I was doing my research, because I was looking for this one answer, for this problem. And there is no one answer for the problem. But the only one thing there is build relationship. So, I always recommend, I tell teachers, if you never did anything else but go into your classroom every day and build relationship with your students, you've done a good thing, right? Obviously, they don't feel they can do that. They got the pressure of the standards, but I'm just making a point, so healthy attachments, relationships, because that's where unhealthy attachments, and let me just make that point real quick if you don't already know. So you have secure attachment and insecure attachment. And so childhood trauma happens from or creates insecure attachment. If it happens if you're in a healthy environment in your circle of origin in your family, and something happens and you have healthy adults there to help you process and things, then you can recover. It's kind of like getting hit by a truck and you're on a motorcycle or you're in a Hummer. You know what I mean? Which one are you going to make out the best? So relationship building, healthy attachment, bringing awareness, self-awareness to your parents is the best thing, Marilee, you're going to be able to do for these little guys at your preschool.
And I have a friend, Marilee, that he's a principal at a high trauma school here in Nashville, Tennessee. He has parent dinners, and he is a parent himself, and he'll sit there and just have conversation with these parents at heart to heart. So it's not always like I'm the person in authority coming at you as the parent, but really being vulnerable in that relationship. Like Dr. Ivy was saying, just building that attachment. And he's got parents who they think, this is my safe place. Not only are the kids feeling like the school is their safe place, but the parents are coming to him when they have things going on because they know the commitment that he and his staff have for their success. So good question. Next, what strategies, this comes from Joy, what strategies can you give us to get parents more involved, especially at middle and high school levels?
Right. I mean, it's some of the same things, maybe just the way you go about it's going to be a little different because you're dealing with older children. But, again, I don't know if you can connect. And again, it all stems out of relationship, what kind of, you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have any kind of relationship. You know what I mean? They're not going to be responding to you if we don't make some kind of effort to build relationship. So some of the ideas that you can still do with, that Tamara was suggesting. But connecting this to, maybe it's even what resources do they need? What is it's kind of what are the basic needs that they have that they could use support in? So maybe if you could be a clearinghouse for meeting some of their needs, right? That's going to bring them in, engage them in a conversation that gives you the opportunity then to build. When I started out in education, I was doing family literacy for TANF, that's what we call it in Delaware, but what is that? Needy families, assistance for needy families. Anyway, but so they, their first concern was having a paycheck or getting their check in the mail, right? So these very survival, Maslow with a hierarchy of needs, those basic needs. So if that's what I did, if you've ever read the Bible, it says, give a cup of cold water in my name. I said, what's the cup of cold water that I've given today? So if I could help meet a need that was, had to do with the job skill, it doesn't have to do with, electric bill, whatever. If I can connect them with those kind of resources, then that's a way perhaps at that level, or just an additional strategy to just show them that you care about them. You're showing them I care, you know what I mean? Because if, obviously to your student that and sometimes, some, parents can get, especially in these families that have probably, could have single parent homes, somebody's in prison or something, it doesn't matter for the student, the parent, they love their parent regardless. And so that helps the parent I mean, that helps the child when you show that kind of, you're out doing outreach to the parent, trying to help their parent, you're going to get a better response from the student as well.
So what I hear you saying, Dr. Ivy, is when you care for that parent,
I like how you translate me all the time. That's good.
You show how you care for the child.
Yes.
The student. So if the parent's successful, the child can be successful as well.
Yeah, because the economics connected to this problem are like mind-boggling.
Yes.
That's a whole nother webinar.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And we're closing our time here today. I just want to harken back to a couple of things that we've talked about. If you're not familiar, friends, I'll include this in the follow-up email. Check out the research of Christina Bethel from Johns Hopkins around positive childhood experiences. It echoes a lot of what Dr. Ivy's been talking about today as well. Dr. Ivy, some last thoughts from you around, here's what I'm really curious about. You know, through this pandemic, I think we've all seen that inequities highlighted.
Right.
The fact that children with distance learning, not everybody's had access to Wi-Fi and devices. Right. So, and I'm going to connect the dots here between that experience in education and the current conversation that we're having in light of the protests with police departments being defunded. Something that I never thought I'd see happen, right? This reform in a big way. So how do you think, and I know this is a huge question in a very short time, but how do you think this highlight of the inequities might lead to true reform, systemic reform? Because it seems to be a time in history where we're open to that, and not just open to it, but we're demanding change.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the, you know, the blessing in all of it is right. There's no more denying that it's broken, it's, you know, and it's inequitable, it's wrong, whatever word that you want to. And I totally agree that people are looking for answers. And so, you know, those who are authentic, truly care about children, you know, need to come up with the solutions. And I think that you and I are two of those people. I mean, my book, Grounded Learning, Education's Recovery Plan, is being finished up and hopefully will be for release next month. So absolutely, because I took this, I said, when this happened, I don't want to come out the same way I went in.
No.
Talking about COVID, right? So, you know what I mean? And, you know, for me, since my heart is to interrupt inequity in education, then I knew I need to do is to share, at least from what I understand, what something different would look like. And so that's what I'm about, building and sharing with anybody who will listen.
Well, thank you so much for taking your time to share with us today, Dr. Ivy. And friends, I will provide a follow-up email to all of you with resources that Dr. Ivy provides, information about her new book, the article, and other resources that you can use, as well as information about Love in a Big World. One of the things that we're about, I've been reflecting on this, especially the past few days, at the heart of the work of Love in a Big World. And I know from all the conversations Ivy and I have had previous to this, at the heart of this work, we are about anti-racism, and we want justice for all. And with Love in a Big World, we define justice as doing right by others. So we want to do right by others and promote love for all in this big world. So thank you again for being with us today. Any last thoughts before we go, Dr. Ivy?
No, I just appreciate everyone, and just like Tamara said, you know, reach out to her or circle back, and anything I can do to help support, absolutely. It's
going to take all of us to bring this change. So thank you all for what you do on a daily basis. Keep up the good work, and we're here for you. Have a good one. Bye-bye.